Tonight, the farming methods that make chicken so cheap. The supermarket meat that's not what it seems to be.
That's well out of order.
And why Chef Raymond Blanc turned his nose up at some supermarket ready meals.
Oh my God. That to me, that's a crime against humanity.
The supermarket's high street stranglehold is changing the way we eat as well as shop. Tonight, we take a trolley down the aisles to lift the lid on some supermarket secrets. It's become an integral part of family life, the weekly trip to the supermarket for the family food shop. The major supermarket chains seem to have grown into a kind of shopper's paradise. Cheap food perfectly presented, a range and variety that would have been undreamt of 50 years ago. So what's the problem? I'm a working journalist with 3 kids, and as far as I'm concerned, my local supermarket is a godsend. I can pick up all of the food I want in a single trip. And what's more, it's all top quality stuff, and cheap too. Well, at least that's what the supermarkets would have us believe. Sunday lunch, 1950s style. Mr. and Mrs. Average Britain sit down with the kids to an extra special treat. A nice bit of chicken, roast potatoes, and 2 seasonal veg.
Dominic!
Fast forward 50 years and that chicken has magically transformed from an expensive treat into Britain's staple diet. But now it's likely to be pre-packed, pre-prepared and ready to eat. And we're eating 4 times as many chickens as 30 years ago. Or to put it another way, literally billions of thighs, breast, wings and drumsticks. Chicken tikka masalas, chicken Kievs, chicken pies, chicken escallops, chicken nuggets, chicken goujons and southern fried chicken. But there's a price to pay for all this cheap food, and it's not just a financial one. I've come deep into the rural heart of England to visit a highly successful, ultra-modern business.
Hello.
Hello, Jane.
How are you?
Very pleased to meet you.
Nice to see you.
Alan Simpson has built a facility which uses the most up-to-date technologies available. It's well run and super efficient.
That's one of the largest independent units in the UK.
It doesn't look like something I would traditionally call a farm.
No, I think it's moved a long way from the early days. We have, unfortunately, and I hate to use the word, become a factory farm, but that's exactly what we are. We're factory farming.
His farm produces over 2 million units every year. Most of them end up on supermarket shelves, in the fresh meat aisles. Alan Simpson grows chickens the modern way. So this is all pretty high-tech. What does this all do? Is it temperature?
All the houses are, the environment is controlled. Daily temperatures, the lighting patterns, how much ventilation the bird receives. It takes care of it all by computer.
Okay.
Now then, before we go in there, I must ask you, no quick movements.
Right.
You are going to find this something different than you've seen before. So I'm asking you not to be too alarmed by it. If you move quietly, the birds will soon become adjusted to you.
Okay, you got me worried now, Alan.
No. But you don't start any sharp movements to start with.
Right.
Okay, just let them.
Are you going to go in
get
first?
used to it.
Oh my God.
Come on.
As far as my eye can see, I can see chickens. My God. It's a good job I'm not frightened of birds. I've just stepped into the middle of 25,000 of them. So is this sort of like the legal
maximum of birds that you're allowed to have in a space like this?
No. We can grow chicken to a lot denser volume on the floor than this.
Denser than this?
Oh yes, this is what I'm happy with. There's more room for them to move around, and I'm personally just happier growing to 34 kilos a metre than the 38 kilos a metre that we're allowed.
But not everyone can afford to be as scrupulous as Alan Simpson.
Unfortunately, in our industry, there's a lot of people put these nice new buildings up. They've got to pay their loans back, and they can't afford to grow them like this. And there's a fine line between them having their own space and having very little space. And a lot of my colleagues believe that if they would all grow chicken like this, if only they could get a just return for it.
As chicken gets cheaper, turnover grows. Alan Simpson now has up to 1/3 birds in the sheds at any one time.
There's been a demand for cheap food, and then you get in the situation where they find out that, oh well, they can now produce it for a little bit less, and you get driven down. The price just gets driven down.
This is a hell of a lot of chickens. When I go into my supermarket, I pay, say, an average of £3 maybe for a chicken. Somebody's making a fortune.
The baby chick is about 26p. The food that we feed it is 64p. Your ongoings, heats, wages and all the other bits and pieces about 16. Your processor probably works on about 50 pence a kilo. That leaves us with 4p. We're left with 4p.
So you personally make 4 pence per chicken?
Yeah, it's a meagre amount for what we have invested here.
With farmers turning over millions of birds every year at just 4 pence a bird, it's vital to ensure that standards are kept high. So 5 years ago, the supermarkets and the poultry industry got together to launch the Assured Chicken Production Standards Scheme. Inspectors are supposed to make regular farm visits, even if they're pre-arranged. And if this red tractor logo is on a chicken on the supermarket shelves, it should mean that conditions in the broiler house have reached the proper standard. And this is all the more important because modern intensive farming techniques have turned chicken rearing into an industrial process. These chicks are a breed called Ross 308. Sounds like a sports car, but in fact it's the supermarket's favourite chicken because it fattens up fast. If you're eating chicken from a supermarket this evening, chances are it'll be a Ross 308. Once these baby chicks start tucking into their specially developed high-protein feed, a modern broiler farm can grow a chick from this to this in just 42 days. And that means that these little chicks will fast forward through life, reaching maturity in just about half the time it took their 1950s forebears. But what does all that do for the taste of supermarket chicken? Bland is about the best you can say, really. But that's a problem that doesn't just go for chicken. How does supermarket meat stand up against the traditional butcher? Chadwick's in Wigan is as traditional as they come. It's an old-fashioned high street butcher's where meat has been prepared the same way for decades. The kind of place the supermarkets have been putting out of business.
I believe that we should produce good food to the best of our knowledge for the benefit of our customer. I pay the farmers as much as I can, I charge the customers as little as I can, and in between I try to make as much money as I can. But we will not sell anything that we don't think's fit.
So what does John Chadwick think of the kind of meat on sale in the supermarkets? We asked him to cast an expert eye over a selection of packaged meat we bought in his local supermarkets.
Right, what else have we got? New season's lamb, yeah, no problems with that. In there we've got 4 loin chops and 2 cutlet chops pretending to be loin chops. Whoa, that's well out of order.
Cutlets passing themselves off as loin chops. Shame on you, Asda. Whatever next? Asda told us one man's cutlet is another man's loin chop. Our loin chop packs, they said, include loin chops from the rib end, also known as cutlets. The National Federation of Meat and Food Traders disagree. Their spokesman told us a traditional loin chop should have a T-bone in it, unlike a cutlet.
All right, let's move on. We've got two nice pork chops. Oh, it isn't. When I read the label, it's with added water for extra succulence. Why adulterate a natural product? What else is gone in with the water? If you read the small print, there's all sorts gone in it. Dry glucose syrup, stabilisers and preservatives. Why? It's a natural product. It'll keep. I don't understand.
And with a pack price of £2.20, you're paying 25 pence for all that water, glucose, stabilisers and preservatives. According to Tesco, because customers now prefer grilling to frying, a brine solution is added to some pork cuts, because otherwise they would lose some succulence.
We've got another one. Oh, it's a cracker, this one. We've got the natural fat there, and we've got some added fat there. That means you've got animals from more than one beast. Bad butchery. If I look at mine, all I have is natural fat. If you buy mine, you buy more meat, less fat. In price, I'm actually a little bit cheaper. About 20 pence a kilo cheaper.
Tesco told us.
Added fat produces a more succulent joint. We also sell joints without added fat.
So the supermarkets can't always beat the traditional butcher on price. But what about taste? We decided to put a range of supermarket meat to the taste test. And here's a place where exquisite taste and top quality ingredients are very much on the menu. Raymond Blanc's award-winning Le Manoir aux Quatre Saisons. We invited a bunch of average shoppers from the Oxford area to join us there. And like most of the rest of us, they now do the bulk of their shopping in supermarkets.
Tesco's and Sainsbury's, they're the local ones.
Asda for cheapness.
I can sort of walk 5 minutes down my road and there's a Sainsbury's local.
Today they've volunteered to help us with our tasting. Sadly though, it won't be the confit of foie gras with soused cherries and spiced mango chutney. No, they're here to see if they can tell the difference between lamb and steak bought in a supermarket and the same meat bought from Raymond Blanc's favourite butcher.
So what do you have for me? That one is a Devonshire or Suffolk or
Devonshire lamb.
Oh,
These are nice.
Lovely.
The texture
Absolutely.
on them is nice and soft.
Yeah.
But first, our jury of 12 are about to pass judgment on 2 sirloin steaks. They'll have nothing to go on but texture and taste. Yes, a lot of eyes lighting up there. And to make life more difficult, they've both been cooked by the man himself. The 2 different types are one that's from the supermarket and then the other one bought from the sort of traditional butchers. What makes that good? They don't know which is which, but it's the butcher's sirloin up first.
Meat number 1, traditional butcher's prime sirloin.
I really like that actually.
Lovely smell. Really firm texture.
Juicy. Very, very nice.
I thought it was very juicy, which I thought was very good. Got a lot of taste straight off.
Okay, great. Well, and now it's the supermarket steak. Here we go. You always get to go first. You're very lucky, aren't you?
Meat number 2, Morrison's top quality sirloin steak.
The first one was more uniform. This is a bit messy in the mouth.
But it had quite a sort of buttery flavour, but it still wasn't as pleasing as the first one.
So, first of all, who preferred sirloin steak number 1? Wow, this looks like a clear-cut verdict. Oh, okay. 10. And who preferred steak number 2? Not looking good for Morrison's. So this looks like first blood to Monsieur Blanc. In fact, it's a 10-2 verdict in favour of the butcher's beef and against the supermarket sirloin.
Thank you. Thank you, panel. Thank you, team. Thank you, team.
You've made me very happy.
Next, it's lamb. And this time, we'll make it just a little more difficult.
Blindfolds on, everyone. Thank you very much.
Very serious.
They've got to do the job on taste alone. No clues from what it looks like this time.
And also, just to make the point that in all of the stuff that we've been buying, when we've been to the supermarkets, we've bought, you know, pretty much the best stuff that they have on offer. We've not sort of gone for the economy range of things, just so that you know that. We'll start from this end.
Meat number 1, Sainsbury's lamb chops.
Okay, and if we could bring in lamb chop number 2.
Meat number 2, traditional butcher's lamb chops.
And who preferred lamb chop number 2?
Not quite unanimous, but another comfortable victory for the traditional butcher.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. We're going to take a bit of a break now, and guess what? You can have something to eat.
A food tasting with Raymond Blanc is a pleasant way to find out about supermarket food. But in part 2, I come face to face with the dark side of the meat industry. This is a chicken farm in Norfolk. Birds are reared here for one of the biggest suppliers of chickens to supermarkets across the country. Behind these doors are thousands of chickens. They've almost reached the end of their life cycle when they'll be slaughtered ready for eating. The conditions you are about to see are truly horrific. This film, shot by an undercover investigator just 2 months ago in May, is a chilling record of the way in which some chickens are being reared. Lameness is obvious. Birds unable to lift themselves out of the ammonia-soaked litter. But in amongst them, dead and injured birds, their companions sometimes trampling on them.
It's absolutely boiling in here, stifling in here.
The condition of some of these birds, badly injured but still alive, is deeply distressing. Yet many of them are likely simply to be slaughtered along with the rest. They won't make grade A, the whole chickens you find on the supermarket shelves, but when it comes to chicken pieces, the requirements are less demanding. We decided to show this film to Don Broom. He's Professor of Animal Welfare at Cambridge University.
What we see here is a bird which is splayed legs and is not able to stand up very well. Every farmer should manage their bird so that no bird is in that situation where it can't walk and is liable to be trampled on. And
that one's just lost the will to live. Look, it's just sitting there. It can't move, it can't go anywhere.
Well, that bird is in extremis. The welfare will be very poor indeed. It can't control what's happening to it, and really it needs to be taken out of that environment and probably killed.
But that's clearly not happening, because that bird hasn't become like that, has it?
No, that's right.
Someone's not picking them out during the day.
No, there would have been a period of several days to get to that point.
See, let's just have a look. Now, that one at first sight looks like it's dead, but then if you look closely just there at the back, it's still moving.
Yes, it is.
Now, that to me looks like suffering. This is appalling. I mean, now look, this is clearly dead.
Yes, that's a bird which has probably been unable to walk and then's been trampled on by the others. And we're actually treating these chickens in a different way from the way we would treat a cow or a horse. We wouldn't do this to a cow or a horse, leave them there to be trampled to death. And it does happen to chickens, and clearly the welfare of the birds is very poor when that does happen. Well, if the bird is prevented from walking, then it's not going to be able to get to water and indeed food, but it would die from dehydration within a few days. So a bird which can't walk is going to die. But the other aspect of that is that if it can't walk, there's a real risk of being walked on by the other birds which are there. In other words, it's trampled to death.
I buy and eat a lot of chicken, and I'd think twice about it now after seeing this. Outside the chicken sheds, the charmingly named dead bins.
I'm going to show you inside this dead bin in a minute. I've just looked in here and you're not going to believe what's inside it.
I mean, this is utterly, utterly repulsive. Look, it's crawling with maggots, and you can't tell me this is following guidelines.
No, of course, what they're supposed to do is to get rid of these birds, take them away from the place where they might be passing on infection to the living birds.
How long is it before maggots appear when something's thrown in?
Probably 4 or 5 days.
So those have been in there for 4 or 5 days. Where should they be? Surely it shouldn't be allowed to get to that.
They could be put into a freezer, or they could be taken to a proper disposal place. And you can actually tell how long exactly they've been there by looking at the developmental stage of those maggots.
And is that not grounds for prosecution?
Not for the welfare of those birds, but it would contravene the codes of practice not to take these birds away, because it would put the other birds at risk.
But I mean, the smell must be appalling. Dead bins like this are a frightening example of how bad things can get. But according to Professor Broom, the conditions inside these sheds are anything but rare.
What we're seeing here is a chicken production unit which is not atypical. Most of the birds are walking around, a few of them are severely affected. This isn't very different from what happens in other chicken production units.
So this is the reality of the chickens that we see on our supermarket shelves?
Yes, it is. Yes, these are the conditions in which the birds live.
Ironically, on the office wall, an out-of-date certificate shows that 4 years ago, this farm satisfied the requirements of the Assured Chicken Production Standards for chicken for human consumption. So who's responsible for these appalling conditions? Alongside that certificate are a number of documents showing that this farm supplies chickens to Grampian Country Foods. Their chickens are on the shelves of all Britain's Big Four supermarkets. We asked Grampian if they were aware of these conditions and what they were doing about it.
Grampian Country Food Group takes the welfare of its chicken flocks very seriously. All of our farms are independently audited by Assured Chicken Production to ensure that they meet all the current regulations and legislation covering chicken welfare. We are confident that our welfare policies and procedures continue to be in place on the farm in question, and cannot make any further comment on the allegations being made without viewing the footage.
You would hope that conditions like these are rare, but Professor Broom says that the state of the birds here is symptomatic of more widespread problems.
What we've done in breeding chickens for meat production over the last 30 or 40 years is to cause them to develop faster and faster. So birds actually are reaching a weight of 2 kilograms in 35 to 40 days now, whereas 30 years ago it would have been 75 to 80 days. Therefore the leg development hasn't kept pace with the body development. So we have a situation where a bird has legs of a 5-week-old bird and essentially the body of a 12 or 15-week-old bird, and they can't support that body very well. And the consequence of it is that you have damage to the tissue, which means there's pain in the joints, and overall the bird is not able to stand up and walk around as it needs to do.
Back in his kitchen, Raymond Blanc is ideally qualified to perform a chicken autopsy.
To me, this chicken represents, if we can call it a chicken, represents all the ills of the food chains. How can you buy a £2.15 chicken? That chicken has the worst possible life. Look at that, it's totally unnatural to have that kind of thickness of breast. I don't want to touch it. I have to touch it today. But, okay, let's take it out of his misery. Poor little beast. I want to show you a few things, okay? Look at that. The older bone is very spongy. There is no calcium whatsoever. Of course, because that chicken has been grown between 40 and 50 days. That chicken, 120 days. Okay? Look how thick the legs are. Why? Because that chicken has never run in his life. Because poor little chap, okay, fed, so it goes as fast as possible and as big as possible. Never mind the taste, never mind the texture, because it's an irrelevance. Okay, so you can see here, look the difference. Okay, all that is spongy, full of blood. Okay, the bone is very brittle. Okay, you can see it here. If I see, it breaks very quickly, very brittle. Look at that. Okay, it's not bone. Okay, it is sponge. Okay, so and that one. Okay, so look at the structure of that bone. Okay, look how opaque it is, how healthy it is, how strong it is. But of course, that chicken has had lots of sex, lots of food from the ground. Okay, had a very happy life. So obviously, it's a very different chicken, and of course, that will translate into the flavor as well. Look at that. Although the chicken, look at the color of that meat. Look at the color. Immediately, you can see, okay, the color is so different.
So, want to make sure you don't buy one of those chickens that can't support their own weight? Well, I've got a clue for you. One that we can all look out for in the supermarket. Something that tells us about the conditions in which a chicken has been reared. It's called a hockburn.
A hockburn is a form of dermatitis which affects the layers of skin on a chicken, and it is something which is caused by the ammonia which is in the litter that the birds will be sitting on or crouching on. Ammonia burns skin, and that will affect several layers of skin and may be followed by ulceration, and that would be painful to the chickens because they have pain receptors in the skin just as we do.
But just how many of these lame, overgrown chickens are making it into the supermarkets?
The study which Nadine Riefman and I carried out in Cambridge involved going to 11 different supermarkets and looking at 384 birds, and what we found was that 82% of the birds had some degree of hockburn, and these levels were rather a lot higher than we'd thought.
Don Broom's study has just been published. It's a shocking indictment of the industry, but it's based on chickens bought some time ago. We wanted to check for ourselves that they were on sale right now in supermarkets. So Professor Broom agreed to go on a hockburn hunt, this time with a secret camera following his movements. Professor Broom went shopping in the Cambridge branch of each of the big 4 supermarkets. It wasn't long before he found the first chicken with a hockburn, a telltale brown mark on the rounded, scaly part of the leg.
An obvious hockburn there. More on one leg than the other.
And as he continued his buying spree, Professor Broom had no trouble finding them. They were in every supermarket he went to.
The damage to the tissue with a hockburn of this size would go down several millimetres into the tissue, so that would be quite painful, something like that.
He even found chickens where the hockburn had been carefully removed before the bird was packed.
You can see the hockburn area, even though the scales have been removed there. You can see that the tissue underneath the scales is damaged by the hockburn.
After several hours of intense shopping, Professor Broom had struck unlucky in all of the big 4 supermarkets.
On this bird here, this is a fairly severe hockburn, at least for a grade A chicken. Now on this bird you can see that there is a small area of hockburn there, a medium size there, and then there's an area where the scales are missing. There might well have been a more extensive hockburn there. And then on this bird here you can see the tail end, the parson's nose, has a lot of red coloration on it. That area there would be the result of contact with the litter and some sort of friction on the litter for this bird during the time that it's in the house. I think people don't realise that they actually can just look at the bird in the supermarket and they can see these brown marks on the legs. Anybody can do this and can decide whether or not to purchase the bird.
The Supermarkets Trade Association, the British Retail Consortium, told us
supermarkets take the issue of animal welfare extremely seriously, and it is a fundamental requirement of their suppliers.
They added that animal welfare is
controlled through strict production standards, one of which is assured chicken production. Any breaches in these standards are unacceptable and are always taken up with the producer.
This chick has a disease called coccidiosis. It's a bacterial infection of the gut which can sweep through a flock of chickens in no time. It causes loss of appetite and diarrhea. Birds with coccidiosis pass droppings containing tiny little spores called oocysts. And if, in the cramped conditions of the broiler house, birds start to peck at those droppings, the whole flock can soon be infected. But responsible chicken farmers like Alan Simpson take preventative measures by giving the birds feed containing special drugs called coccidiostats. They've been doing it for years. Trouble is, not much is known about the effect of coccidiostats on people. So, to be safe, farmers are required to withdraw them from the birds' feed several days before slaughter. But organic farming pressure group, the Soil Association, are worried that there may be some left when they're plucked, filleted and whisked off to the shelves. We decided to put the supermarket's cheap chicken to the test. We went to all 4 major supermarkets and brought frozen chickens in each. And some chicken livers too, because that's where the coccidiostats are most likely to be found. We sent them to a top research lab in Germany to be tested for any sign of coccidiostat residue. This is what they found. There were traces in 37 of our 40 supermarket samples. No problem there, though, because the amounts we found are well within the government's acceptable limit of 200 micrograms per kilogram of meat. But all our chickens had the same coccidiostat in them. It's called nicarbazine, and it's the subject of a bit of a Euro scrap. Dr. Vivian Howard is one of the country's leading toxicologists.
With respect to nicarbazine, this has been looked at by the EU in their FEDAP committee, and once again they've come up with a report which says there isn't enough information there for them to make a decision about the mutagenicity. So that's the ability of this medicine or drug to actually cause damage to DNA. And so they, in the absence of that information, they are saying that they can't set a maximum residue level.
In other words, they can't decide whether nicarbazine is definitely safe at any level. And what that means is that whilst here in the UK the residue levels we found were well within the government's acceptable limits, some experts think there's good reason to be extra careful.
I think we can be fairly certain that if you're eating chicken from broiler houses, you will be getting a level of exposure to this compound. Now, of course, the regulators will say, but it's underneath the maximum residue level, therefore it's safe. But I think that really, particularly with respect to infants and the fetus, we should be minimising exposure.
Now, it's not just me, is it? These bigger, grow faster chickens do seem to produce an awful lot of fat when they're cooked in the pan.
So is the modern way of eating breeding not just obese children, but obese chickens too? Well, there's only one way to find out. Liposuction. This is the Institute of Brain Chemistry and Human Nutrition at London Metropolitan University. We've brought along a chicken from each of the big 4 supermarkets, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Morrison's and Asda, so the boffins here can find out what they're made of. They're going to start by extracting all the fat to see if these cheap chickens are just obese couch potatoes. First step, into the blender. The necessary chemicals are standing by. The whole chicken has to be reduced to a pink goo. Then add some solvent and the long process of extracting the fat is underway. A week later, the tests are all complete, and I'm back at the Institute to meet with Michael Crawford. No, not that one. Dr. Michael Crawford. He's the man who supervised the tests for us, and apparently he's got some startling results.
Well, this is the fat out of one single chicken, and that was about 17% fat.
That's almost a pint of fat from one chicken. I'm horrified by this.
Basically, they were all the same.
I eat a lot of chicken.
Right.
Because I think it's low in fat.
Well, it isn't.
And that's
just out of one chicken. I mean, what effectively you're getting here, the big problem is that you're getting, in terms of the calorie value, more calories coming from fat than protein. And what this means is that the public thinks they're buying a protein-rich food. In fact, they're buying a fat-rich food. In 1976, the Royal College of Physicians, British Cardiac Society said in their report on coronary heart disease, if you want to avoid heart disease, eat less fatty red meat and choose chicken because it's low in fat.
And that's
it used to be the case.
It was
the case that chickens provided more protein than fat. Now it's the other way around.
Chickens didn't always used to have this much fat.
No, of course it didn't.
Did they? So why do they now?
What happens is that if you feed the animal on a high energy diet, and if it doesn't get any exercise, it does put on weight, and the weight that it puts on, a large part of that is fat.
So this extra fatty chicken that we're all buying, I think we buy 850 million of them a year now. This extra fatty one has, in a way, been created by the demand of the supermarkets.
Yes.
They provide a very cheap form of protein for families that don't necessarily have a lot of money.
Yeah, and the problem is that exactly the people that you're talking about who don't have much money to spend on food, they're exactly the people who are now suffering from obesity, diabetes, heart disease and stroke.
But there's more bad news. Even the type of fat is wrong.
There are 2 families of essential fatty acids, both of which you need in a proper balance, the omega-6 and the omega-3. And because of the intensive rearing of animals, what has happened is that the balance between these 2 families has got completely out of sync. The omega-3 fatty acids that's important for the brain was, in the 1970s, knocking at the levels of about 170 milligrams per 100 grams of food. There's only 20 in these. So it's been sliced 7-fold. But the interesting thing is that people at the National Institutes of Health in the United States, Joe Hibble in particular, is now blaming the rise in mental ill health amongst young people on precisely this shift in the ratio of the balance between these fatty acids.
So, cheap chicken is fatter than it used to be, but the British Retail Consortium insist that
chicken meat remains a nutritious part of the British diet and complies with all UK and European regulations.
At least roast chicken isn't in a box, yet more and more of what we're being sold these days is just that. Over the last decade or so, it's the aisle that's grown like a broiler bird. Welcome to the world of the supermarket ready meal.
That, to me, that's a crime against humanity.
You can't
help noticing that the supermarket shelves are increasingly full of pre-cooked this, partially roasted that, generally complete meals that you can just pop into your oven or microwave, and hey presto. Yes, the ready meal is taking over the aisles. Mission control at one of the most successful ready meal companies in the world. You'll find their curries in supermarkets up and down the high street. And this is Sir Ghulam Noon. Churning out ready meals has lifted him into the Sunday Times rich list. He's made 50 million from them. But according to him, the person who really benefits is the harassed housewife.
It has actually broken the shackles of the housewife from the kitchen. The housewife can go to work, and now today, and most important thing is that it is a safe product to eat.
This is food as industrial process. High quality ingredients, additive free, and all the latest machinery.
Any factories which produces the ready meals in this country, the factories are brilliant. In terms of the microbiologies are checked, and the super services, super machinery, etc. And they are absolutely not only delicious, but they are safe to eat. Because it is, the ready meals are actually made in the environment, which is a unique environment nowadays. It's completely aseptic factories are there.
Noons were one of the first out of the blocks, but pretty soon all the supermarkets were onto the ready meals bandwagon themselves. But more doesn't necessarily mean better.
When you look at the label on the back of a ready meal, the vast majority of them are made with what's cheapest for manufacturers to use.
And the quality is often really poor. You're paying for extra additives, you're paying for added water, huge amounts of sugar and salt.
Lamb casserole will have kind of 10 different types of sugar on the back. Well, what's that doing there? It's because they're not real ingredients giving real flavour.
But that is added value food, and that's very profitable for them.
I'd really rather not eat them.
It's a market that's grown by more than 60% in the last 10 years or so, almost as much as the claims for their products. Take this Sainsbury's Taste the Difference Moroccan chicken with apricots and pine nuts.
Pairing sweet fruit with spices in the time-honoured Moroccan style gives this dish the exotic, warming flavours of a tagine.
I think supermarkets in Britain have really grown by exploiting the gap, that knowledge gap between the food producer and the consumer. And that's where they've made their money. And they've succeeded because we know so little about food, we don't know any better. So if someone says to us something that is blatantly ridiculous, like, here is a ready meal that was cooked in a factory and trucked all around Britain, and it tastes much better than anything that you could cook at home, we actually believe that. Now, most Europeans would say, come off it, you've got to be joking. It won't, it can't.
We asked Raymond Blanc to try a typical supermarket ready meal, bœuf bourguignon from Asda.
Voilà. Okay, that bœuf bourguignon is with a very, very strong colour. Let's have the smell of it. Yeah, you go for it. Oh my God.
Very intense.
That to me, that's a crime against humanity. It's a crime against food. When I came in the 70s in England, yes, that's what I would do. But now, you don't expect. Oh, it's horrendous. It's absolutely, it's jammy, it's messy, it's chemical. You can feel the chemicals right the way through, no? It's, wow.
Just take one each. So Raymond would clearly have no problem spotting a ready meal, but would our average shoppers be able to?
It's done food, only.
After a little persuasion, he agreed to knock up a bœuf bourguignon of his own to see if they could tell the difference.
Now I'm going to mix those two together. Wow, look at that. Then the one, wow. Oh.
Well, Raymond's obviously very keen on healthy ingredients, and so are the supermarkets, because their product planners have discovered that health sells. Combine convenience and health in the same packet, and you've got a supermarket Shangri-La. And now they're all over the place. Healthy living, be good to yourself, eat smart, good for you. Each of the big four has its healthy, ready meal range. But just how good for you are they? We asked Staffordshire Trading Standards to check out some of the claims.
In most cases, the healthier option type styled product did contain less fat than the standard product, and that's a good thing, and that's what we'd expect. But in some cases, it would contain the same amount of fat as the standard product, and in one or two cases, it actually contained more.
Take these chicken dippers from Sainsbury's Blue Parrot range for children. They actually have more fat per 100 grams than the equivalent adult product. And this good-for-you lasagna from Asda has less fat than Asda's ordinary lasagna. But that's because it's got less meat. It's just 14% meat instead of 23%. That's one way of cutting down your fat intake, I suppose. These healthy meals seem to have plenty of helpful nutritional information on the packets, but you need to know what it all means. Take salt, for example.
It's not universally true that if you buy a healthy option meal, you necessarily get a reduced salt meal. We have here a healthy living jambalaya, which claims to be 3% fat, 477 calories, which on analysis found to be true. If you look at the back of the label for the full information, it points out that a serving of this product would give me the 477 calories, but would also give me 3.8 grams of salt. So if I, as a woman with a need of 2,000 calories a day and targeted not to eat more than 6 grams of salt a day, at this I would get a quarter of my daily amount of calories, but 3/4 of the recommended amount of salt that I could eat in a day.
Back in the kitchen, Raymond's boeuf bourguignon is ready for the tasters. Will they spot which is which? I'm going to bring Raymond in. Okay.
Don't fall. I've worked 25 years to get.
Can we look at the sweat, please? Can we look at the sweat here? Let me just ask you first of all, any sort of thoughts and observations on what you tasted?
The first one was very intense. The second one, it was just lighter and cleaner tasting.
It's more depth to the flavours in it, maybe.
Okay, well, so you ready for this, Raymond?
Oh, completely. Yeah. I expect always the worst.
Who preferred dish number one? Who preferred dish number two?
Well done, guys, well done.
I don't think I need to tell you the answer, do I? A very relieved and happy
Not
man.
really relieved.
Asda versus Raymond Blanc. No contest. But can I persuade him to come to my kitchen to cook it? Next week on Supermarket Secrets. Ducks in distress. Why the Spanish prefer ugly tomatoes. And the dairy cows bred to produce up to 120 pints of milk every day.
Monday night at 8 for part 2 of this Dispatches special. Well, next up, an ambassador's ball and a double-crossing secret agent, very 007, in an extended Big Brother.